Christopher. So how was it, now that it's over? How do you feel about the experience? It was cool. I mean, it was exactly what I expected it to be. College is college wherever you go, Joe said. I could have told you that shit. Fuck college. I fucking hate it. I could have gone to Howard and enrolled in the fine arts department. I could have been the greatest black actor that campus has ever seen and gotten recognized in a heartbeat. Did I do that? No. Do I regret it? Hell fucking yeah! Fuck college, Shaun said, pounding his fist on the table. Chris, Joe, Shaun, Rich, and Caleb all sat around the coffee table on Shaun's porch. Chris held the Dutch between his thumb and forefinger. Yo, you sure you don't want to try this, Richie boy? It's not that average piff that I've been getting. Apparently it's imported from Mexico or like Cuba or one of them countries, Chris said. Because Mexico and Cuba are so similar in name, Caleb said jokingly. Nah, I'm good, thanks though, Rich said. Chris shrugged and passed the weed to Shaun. Can't believe it's summer already, Shaun said. I'm supposed to go to fucking Florida next month. Oh, word? You going with the bird? Joe asked. Unfortunately. Ugh. I hate the fact that I'm using such language. I want to be excited about it, but I can't. The whole time it's just going to be a battle of wills. She's going to want to go to the beach every fucking day, or go to Miami or some fucking shit, and I'm just trying to chill in an empty house and drink beer, Shaun said depressingly. Yeah, she's definitely not going to let you do that. She'll all be like, Shaun, why don't we go to a nightclub in Orlando? Wear this shirt I picked out for you, Joe said, laughing. Chris, Rich, and Caleb all joined in on the laughter. Shaun scrunched his face and shook his head. She doesn't tell me what to wear anymore. I put an end to that. But you're right about the nightclub shit. She's already starting to look into it. It's not going to be vacation for me. It's going to be war. I'm just going to end up saying no for the majority of the week and not having a single second to enjoy my time there, Shaun said. It's funny because that's the best case scenario for you. The worst case scenario is that she asks for a bunch of shit and you give it to her. That'll be even worse, Joe said. I agree. I hope that doesn't happen. Fuck, why did I book those tickets? Shaun asked himself. Why did you book the tickets? Caleb asked. We had a fight, and I booked the flight to show that I wasn't trying to dump her anytime soon, Shaun said. But you are trying to dump her soon, aren't you? Are you still planning on going to Cali next year? Joe asked. Yes, Shaun replied gloomily. Don't ask why I do things I do. I'm stupid. I'm an idiot. All I can hope for is that I don't spend too much money down there, and that I can somehow manage to break up with her by the end of the summer. That's my goal for the summer, and to hang out with my best friend Richie Boy more often. Shaun wrapped his arm around Richard. Rich made a grimace and tensed his shoulders. I'm going to have to fucking compete with this fuck over here, though, which is going to be annoying. Just remember who you've known longer, Richie Boy. Remember who got you laid your first time. And your second time, most likely. And third, Shaun said, grinning. Caleb laughed. Is it always a competition with this guy? He asked, looking at Chris. Chris chuckled. Pretty much. I'd say anything he thinks he's good at or has a patent on, he wants to be the best at, he said. Holy shit. Shaun, how would you feel if we tried to introduce another black guy into YSC? What the fuck would you do? Joe asked. I'd definitely feel threatened, but more so I'd be hurt. I'd try to rationalize it, I guess. Like, maybe that guy happens to be really, really funny or some shit, but I would still end up feeling like shit. I'd be sad. You guys wouldn't do that to me, right? Shaun asked. Well, it'd be kind of hard to do that considering the fact that YC consists of nothing more than close friends sitting around a table and talking about the good old days together. Maybe playing some video games after. I'm sure no black replacement could be Shaun at Halo, Caleb said, smiling. Shaun beamed at Caleb. I understood the not-so-subtle jab in that statement, but I'm choosing to ignore it and reply back with a thank you for the compliment of my Halo playing skills. I appreciate the acknowledgement of my greatness, Shaun said. I wouldn't say great. I'd say you're a better Halo player than people who've never played the game, but you're not a fucking savant or some shit, Rich said. Ooh, the silent voice speaks. I could argue with you right now. I could say how between me and Christopher we're the best Halo players within a 50-mile radius, but at the end of the day, why the fuck would I argue about video game statistics at this point in my life? Shaun asked, smiling. I'm just saying you're not that great, Rich said. And I'm just saying next time we play you can be on my team and hope that my greatness will rub off on you, Shaun said. Chris laughed at Shaun. He loved it. He didn't know where Shaun's arrogance came from, but he loved it. And so did Joe, Chris could tell. They were both laughing and shaking their heads in unison. The Dutch had made its way back to Chris. He took it and inhaled. Caleb leaned over to him. So how's the bread baking business? I haven't been over there in a while. Are you still running a tight shift? Caleb asked Chris. Chris smiled. The tightest, Caleb. Danny loves me for it. When I come in, I have that place running like clockwork. And all I can think at the end of the day is how I would have made an awesome drug kingpin, he said. Caleb laughed. That would definitely give you something to rap about if you go that route. It's kind of hard to come off gritty and hard while working as a manager at COSI. You'd even be better off being an employee because then you get to talk about your oppression by the man, he said. Chris nodded his head in agreement. You know what you're talking about, Chris said. The shit bothers me in all honesty. The amount of hours I put into that place. I just think about how I'm never getting them back. I know what you mean. There's nothing worse than working full-time at a job that adds no legitimacy or happiness to your life, Caleb said. I hear that. All I get from there is money. And sore feet, Chris said. Caleb shrugged. You can always go back to school and get another job that pays you money, but make it your goal to avoid sore feet. That's the best motivation to go back to school that I've ever heard. Get a college degree to avoid sore feet. If somebody had told me that shit in high school, I'd probably be graduating Princeton right now, Chris said. Wouldn't that be interesting? If parents just told their teenage sons and daughters to walk around the house in a circle for 7 hours a day and tell them that that's what the rest of their life will be like if they don't go to college. That might work for some people, Caleb said. It would work for me. I keep telling my nephew Ronnie he just got hired at COSI to not follow my footsteps. I told him to look at the job that he has right now as temporary. I fucking miss that fact. The idea of this job being temporary. It hasn't been temporary for a long time, Chris said. Managerial positions will do that to you. Well, there's hope yet. You're young. You have enough time to find something meaningful to do with your life. I'm sure you'll get there if you try. And your nephew is even better off. He's still in high school, Caleb said. Doing the same shit I was doing. Acting in plays, fucking mad puss, working out, Chris said. How's he looking now? For a 17-year-old, Caleb asked. Cut. Really fucking cut. It's ridiculous. Like, I can't even compare my younger self to him because that's not what I was going for when I was his age. I was going for mass and shit. I was 200 pounds when I was a senior, Chris said. That's pretty impressive, Caleb said. How much are you now? 187. I smoke too much weed and don't lift like I used to. It's annoying, but what can you do when you're working 60-hour work weeks? Chris asked. Shaun cut into the conversation obnoxiously. What the fuck are you two talking about like two sneaky-ass shitheads? I don't know, I'm high. It's the best I could come up with. Chris looked at Shaun and rolled his eyes jokingly. Caleb laughed and did the same. At least you have YFC to support you through this somewhat tumultuous stage in your life, Caleb said with a grin. Chris wanted to lie in bed for just a little bit longer before getting up. It was his day off. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The world was moving on around him. He could hear the dogs running throughout the house. He heard Ronnie blasting Slaughterhouse in the weight room. He heard the sound of dumbbells being lifted and dropped. He kept his eyes closed. The day could start without him. He didn't care. A half-empty bottle of Percocets lay under the bed. Chris had taken 2 the night before after leaving Shaun's house. He wanted to take 2 more, but he knew Kate was expecting to see him. His day off wasn't his day off at all. It was their day off. He couldn't stay in his bed high off prescription drugs and watch TV all day if he wanted to. Instead, he had to get dressed and tidy up his room before Kate entered. He had to hide his weed from sight. He had to go out and get dinner with her at some restaurant. His day off was not his day off. Christopher's door knocked. He jumped. He had fallen back asleep. It felt as if another 30 minutes had passed. He quickly looked at his phone. It was now 2 o'clock. Kate had texted him twice and called him once. The door opened. Ronnie poked his head in timidly. Hey, do you have a second? Ronnie asked. Yeah, come on in, Chris said groggily. Ronnie entered and closed the door behind him. So, I've been trying to get into legs. I don't want to be one of those guys who walks around with a nice upper body but shitty legs. Do you know any good leg workouts? Like, I'm starting to do squats at school. Mr. Campanelli is showing us from how the form is supposed to be and shit. I just wanted to ask if you knew anything else besides that I could do, Ronnie said. Chris frowned. Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I hate to disappoint you, but legs is the one thing that I literally know nothing about. Legs and abs. Abs I actually try to work out once or twice in my life, but I don't think I've ever even bothered trying to touch my legs. Unfortunate, I know, he said. That's cool. I'll probably just look up some routines on the internet. I benched 215 today. Anthony was there. He saw me do it, Ronnie said proudly. Damn, good for you, man. Seriously, that's awesome. Keep it up. You'll be in better shape than both of us by the time you're done, Chris said, if he's not already. Thanks, man. All right, well, I guess I'll talk to you later. I got work in 2 hours, so I'm probably just going to smoke and chill out until then, Ronnie said. All right, Chris said. Ronnie went to the door and opened it. Chris watched him hesitate for a moment before turning around. There was something else I wanted to ask you. Anthony told me that you sold him Percocets that you got off a coworker. Is it possible that I could buy some off of you? I mean, if you have more, that is, Ronnie said. Chris looked at Ronnie and chewed his lip. Did you ask Anthony? He asked. Yeah, I tried to get some off of him, but he had already used them all. He told me he got them from you, Ronnie said. I don't know, man. Chris rubbed at his face and frowned. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm comfortable selling Percocets to my nephew. I just feel like that's kind of morally wrong. I don't know. I'm sorry, he said. He felt awkward. Ronnie nodded his head. Yeah, I understand, Chris. It's cool. Yeah, my bad, man. If you want perks, you're going to have to find them on your own, Chris said. Okay. Ronnie looked at the ground. Well, I'll talk to you later. He left the room and closed the door behind him. Good enough time, isn't he, to get up? Chris slowly pushed himself upright. He stretched his arms and yawned. 2 o'clock isn't bad, he said to himself. He looked down at his phone and kept himself from groaning. He grabbed it and redialed the last number that had called him. Kate. After a couple seconds, her bright, melodic voice answered the phone. Hey, what's up? I called you earlier, she said. Yeah, I'm just seeing it, Chris said. Were you asleep? Kate asked. No, I was, helping my dad out with something. I left my phone in my room, so that's why I didn't get your call, Chris said. Oh, okay. So when are you free for me to come over? Kate asked. Chris looked around at his messy room. Uh, do you want to head over in 15 minutes? He asked. Sure, I'll see you then, Kate said pleasantly. She hung up the phone. Chris tossed his phone back onto his bed. He bent down and grabbed a handful of dirty clothes off the floor and threw them into the back of his closet. He shoved his box of weed underneath his bed and put the Percocets in his dresser underneath a pile of clothes. He grabbed a pair of sweatpants and pulled them on. He threw on an old shirt with paint on it. He knew he would have to change before he left for whatever restaurant she picked, but Chris wanted to be as comfy as possible while he was in the confines of his own home. He stepped out of his room and into the kitchen. His mother was there rinsing dishes in the sink. Chris grabbed a glass from her and filled it up with tap water. Good morning, his mother said sarcastically. Back to you, Chris said. He walked over to the kitchen table and took a seat. Chris watched as one of the dogs wandered its way into the room. Patty. She walked over to Christopher's mother and wiggled her head in between her legs. His mother looked down at her and smiled. Aw, does my baby want some attention? She asked the dog. His mother stopped what she was doing in the sink and pulled off her rubber gloves. She bent her knees and began playing with Patty's ears. There you go, she said in a baby voice. There you go. There's a good girl. Who's my favorite girl in the whole world? You are. Chris snorted and shook his head. You're not supposed to do that, he said lowly almost to himself. What am I not supposed to do, Christopher? His mother asked as Patty licked her face. You're not supposed to let her take over your life. She's a dog. You were doing something. You were cleaning dishes in the sink and you literally just dropped everything you were doing because Patty asked for attention. Now she's going to think that she's in control of your life. You can't let them think like that. They'll just get overconfident and walk all over you. You have to be the one in control. You have to pet them when you feel like it, not when they want you to, Chris said. His mother laughed at him with her eyes big with patronization and humor. What the hell? Where are you getting this from? Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer. I'm sure you've heard of it. You should watch it. It's on Netflix. You could learn a lot from it. You're treating these dogs like they're children, and that's why they're taking advantage of you. I could train them, Chris said. Train them to do what? His mother asked incredulously. To obey, Chris said sternly. His mother rolled her eyes and stood up. You have fun with that, she said with a wink. She moved past him and gave him a pat on the shoulder before disappearing upstairs. Patty stayed behind in the kitchen. She sat on her hind legs and stared at Chris with her tongue out panting. Chris stared back at her curiously. Slowly she stood up and walked calmly over to where Chris sat. She looked up at him with big eyes. It looked as if she were smiling. Chris scowled down at her. She lowered her face to the ground. Chris had watched enough of the show to know that movement was meant to tell the owner that the dog wanted to be pet. He leaned towards Patty, making care not to touch her. Sit, he said calmly. Patty looked up at him again with a confused expression on her face. Her tongue was still out, wobbling back and forth at the edge of her mouth as she breathed heavily. Sit, he said again. Nothing. Patty did not respond. Chris placed his hand on the back of her neck, as he had seen Caesar Milan do time and time again. He squeezed her neck lightly, making sure to apply a certain amount of pressure. Sit, he repeated again. Patty shook her head back and forth in an attempt to shake Chris's hand off her. He held it there firmly on the back of her neck. Chris clenched his jaw and squeezed harder. Sit, he said angrily. Patty yelped in pain and quickly backed away from Chris. The dog looked at him once and turned her head away from him, walking into the other room. Chris sighed. He contemplated going after her and bringing her back to the kitchen, but before he decided, his phone had started to ring in his pocket. It was Kate. She was at the door. Chris stood up reluctantly and went to answer the door. Kate smiled when she saw Chris. Her hair was tied up in a She wore jeans and flats with a Townsend t-shirt on over top. Chris stepped aside. She let herself in. So what was that thing you had to help your dad with? Kate asked. What? Chris said, confused. What were you helping your dad with earlier? When you left your phone in your room? Kate asked. Oh yeah, I was helping him move something, rearranging furniture and stuff like that. Boring shit. Don't ask why you didn't ask Anthony or his able grandson for that matter, Chris said. Oh, okay. I was just wondering. So, where would you like to eat later? I've been craving Chinese food, but if you have any ideas, we can do that, Kate said. Chinese food works. We could go to Lim Fong's, Chris said. I like Peking Wok better. They have good General Tso's chicken, Kate said. Kate followed Chris into his room as he sat down on his bed and grabbed some sneakers to pull on. Peking Wok works. I have to take Patty out for a walk. She's getting restless, Chris said. Okay, that's fine. It's really nice out. Have you been outside? Kate asked. Chris shook his head. He left his bedroom. Kate followed him. He grabbed Patty's leash from the kitchen cupboard and found Patty hiding underneath the table. He put the leash on her and led her and Kate out the house. Kate talked about her day during the walk through Chris's small street. She mentioned working with the kids at Lumberton Middle School. She talked about developing relationships with the faculty there. She's invited to a lunch date by 2 other substitute teachers. Chris nodded and made a comment when it was appropriate. He was more focused on Patty. She was trying to lead him. He yanked on the chain every time she pulled further away. His goal was to get her to walk behind him. It showed true dominance over the canine. He was the master, and the master always leads. Is something wrong? Kate asked. Chris looked at Kate as if seeing her there for the first time that day. He recognized her as his girlfriend, but somehow she still seemed foreign to him. He had known her for 8 years, yet she was still separate from him. What do you mean? Chris asked nonchalantly. He pulled the leash again as Patty sniffed around the grass and drifted away. You just seem quiet today. Did I do something wrong? Kate asked. Nothing's wrong, Chris said irritably. He walked ahead of her. Kate jogged up and grabbed his arm. There is something wrong. What is it? Are you mad at me over something? Kate asked. No, I'm trying to get this dog to do what I want it to do, Chris said, flustered. And she won't, so I'm annoyed. A plus B equals C. Get it? What are you trying to get her to do? Kate asked, confused. Walk behind me, Chris said, almost yelling. Kate flinched. Her eyebrows dropped and her mouth slowly began to upturn. Why do you want her to walk behind you? Kate asked. Her voice was quiet and fearful. Chris noticed her discomfort after glancing at her face. In 10 seconds, Chris predicted tears to start flowing. He tried not to roll his eyes. He resisted the urge to scream at her. He tempered his emotion. When he spoke, it came out in an even tone. I just want her to learn some obedience, that's all. These dogs have gotten too out of hand. The king is a lost cause. He's too fucking old to change his ways. I mean, they named him the king, for Christ's sakes. That just about sums it up for you right there. He's going to die in a couple of years, so there's no point in even bothering to fix him. He walks around thinking he's alpha male of the fucking house, so fuck him. I'm just trying to make sure that doesn't happen. The same thing doesn't happen with Patty. That's all. Does that make sense? Chris asked. Kate blinked twice with a stunned look on her face. Yeah, it makes sense, she said softly. Awesome. I'm not angry at you. You can keep talking about the shit that goes on in your day, and I can keep listening and nodding my head, Chris said. He realized that he hadn't smoked weed yet. He pictured where it was, underneath his bed, waiting for him to come and consume it. It was what he needed to do. Do you want me to go back to the house and wait for you there? Kate asked. The tears in her eyes had arrived. He watched the first one fall. Chris didn't feel anything. He was still angry. He didn't even know why he was angry. He knew he would feel guilty later. He knew that he would do something to make her feel better, like buying her Chinese food, giving her a massage, kissing her, and telling her that he loved her. That would get him out of the doghouse. It was easy enough. Yeah, you can head back. I'll be there in a bit. The door should be open, Chris said. He didn't look at her face. He heard her turn on the rough gravel road and walk away. He looked up after she had some distance from him. Her face was in her hands as she walked. He saw her shoulders heaving. She was crying heavily. Chris knew it. He waited for her to turn the corner onto his street before he sat down on the curb. Patty walked over to him and stuck her wet dog nose into the side of his face. He swatted away angrily. Sit, he said numbly. Patty ignored him. They were eye level, he and the dog. She waited next to him. He looked over at her. Chris looked into her eyes. She sat down on her hind legs and continued waiting. Chris saw expectation in her eyes. He didn't understand it. He looked deeper into them. What the fuck are you waiting for? He whispered. Chris knew what he was waiting for. It was at home, under his bed. He wondered if he could sneak a Percocet into his system while Kate wasn't looking. I could do it in the bathroom, but that's almost too much of a drug addict cliche. He waited for a couple of minutes sitting on the curb. He wasn't ready to face Kate yet. He had to get past her in order to get to his room. She would be upset when he would start to roll one, but Chris didn't care in that moment. He needed it. He shook his head in disappointment. He realized that he had become dependent on weed. He hated acknowledging the fact, but he couldn't help it. Chris was hooked on it. Kate was sitting in her car when Chris walked up to his house with Patty lagging behind him on her leash. He threw up his hands in exasperation and walked over to her car door. He opened it. "Why are you in your car?" he asked her. "I didn't want to go inside yet," Kate said. She wiped away tears. Her nose was red from crying. She was trying to cover it up. Chris sighed. "I'm sorry I yelled at you," he said. "It's not that," Kate said, breaking into a small sob. "Then what is it then? Huh? Tell me," Chris said, trying his best not to sound annoyed. "You keep things from me. I don't know why you do it. It's not fair. I tell you everything about myself. I told you that I used to be fucking bulimic, and you won't tell me anything about yourself. After 8 years. I feel like I hardly know what's going on in your head half the time, and it hurts. Why are you doing it to me?" Kate asked. Chris groaned and looked around for some form of help. There was none. "I don't do it on purpose. I told you what the fuck was wrong. I was trying to get Patty to do something, and she wouldn't do it. It sounds stupid, but that's why I was angry," Chris said. Kate shook her head and continued crying. "I don't believe you. You're lying," she said. "Why the fuck would I lie to you about this?" Chris asked angrily. "I don't know, but you're hiding something. I'm almost scared to find out what it is, but I know it's something. You can tell me, Chris. I'm your Kate. I'm your Kate," she said. Chris felt like he was in a soap opera. He wanted to run. He wanted to bash her windows in and get her to stop crying. He wanted to smack her and tell her to calm the fuck down. His heart was racing. He felt adrenaline being pumped through him. Chris felt Patty tug on the leash. He looked over at her. She was pulling away from him, trying to get back into the house. Fury surged through him. He yanked on the leash in a swift and violent pull and yelled, "Stay!" at the top of his lungs. "Chris, you're hurting her!" Kate yelled, grabbing at the leash. Chris let go of the leash and backed away with his hands up. He felt numb. Kate scrambled for the leash before Patty could run away. She was on her knees next to her car, looking up at Chris in shock. He stepped past her into the house. He walked past Ronnie, who was sitting on the couch playing a video game. His nephew tried to ask him if everything was okay. Chris ignored him. He walked into his room and shut the door. Within less than 5 minutes, Chris had a joint rolled and ready to go. He was stretched out, lying on his bed, blowing smoke out the nearest window, when Chris heard the front door open and close. He heard Patty running through the house, happy to be free of her leash. Seconds later, there was a knock at Chris's door. He snorted. "Come in," he said. Kate peeked her head through, looking fearful. The rest of her body followed. She closed the door behind her and sat down at the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry. I really am. I don't know what happened," Chris said. "I'm sorry," Kate said. "It's my fault. It's all my fault." Chris waited for her to go on. She did. "I just feel like everything is so perfect between us that I guess I'm always just looking for something that's going to mess everything up. I know it's stupid, but that's how I feel. I'm scared of losing what we have together. Don't you agree? Don't you think this relationship is so perfect it's almost scary?" Kate asked. "Yeah, I know exactly what you mean," Chris lied. "And I guess I just get insecure sometimes. I know it's so stupid of me. I know it is. I'm sorry. I just love you so much." "I'm an idiot," she said, laughing. Her eyes were red from crying. She sounded exhausted. "It's okay. I'm sorry for flipping out on you. That wasn't necessary. I love you too." Kate leaned over to Chris and kissed him on the cheek. He finished what was left of the Dutch he had rolled and put the remnants of it in a discarded Gatorade bottle. He knew what came next. He kissed her and she kissed back strongly. Her hands ran over his muscular shoulders. They wandered under his shirt and grabbed at his chest. Chris flipped her onto her back and continued kissing her. He unbuttoned her pants and pulled it away from her face just a second longer to slide her jeans off. He took care of himself next. She looked up at him with yearning in her eyes. Chris almost smiled. "I'm about to have high makeup sex. I don't know how I pulled this off, but good job," he told himself before entering her. It was an explosion of pleasure. Kate was extremely wet. Chris did his absolute best to savor it. He knew from the state he was in that he wouldn't last long. He fucked hard and lustfully. Her thighs served as the cradle his hips rammed into. Her hands gripped at his pelvis in a feeble attempt to try and stop his intense thrusts. He ignored them. His orgasm came on him like a tidal wave. Chris tried to pull out all of his anger and disappointment and frustration into it. His pace quickened to abnormal speeds. The entire house shook from the force. Chris let the orgasm shoot through him and into her. She squealed when he reached his climax. Her face wore a scared expression as if she didn't know what Chris was going to do next. He liked it. His thrust subsided as the plateau faded away. He stroked in and out for a couple more times before rolling off of her and onto his back. Kate smiled and laid the back of her hand on his chest. Chris looked down and saw that Kate had kept her flats on. He snorted to himself. "I love you," Kate whispered. "I love you so much, Chris. I hope we stay together forever." Chris nodded his head and chose to ignore the actual implications of that statement. I love you too, he said. So I'm thinking nap and then Chinese food. What do you think? I've been up all day. Okay, Kate said, smiling happily. Chris smiled back. The crisis had been averted. He was happy and high. Hold on a second. I think that's Richie over there, Chris said, squinting out the window of Kate's car. Where do you see Rich? Kate asked, looking around. Right there. Chris pointed ahead of him. It was dark outside, but Chris could still make out his friend's car off down the street. He was sitting on a bench with a girl outside of an ice cream shop. Pull up to him real quick, Chris said to Kate. He rolled the window down as they drew closer to Richard. Chris stuck his head out the window and gave Richard a large, comical smirk. Funny seeing you here, Chris said, his smile so big his eyes became squinted. Rich laughed and waved at Kate. Sup, man? What are you up to? Rich asked. Me and the female just ate Chinese food, and it was pretty good, actually. I had a good time eating it. What's your story, though? Do you work here or some shit? Chris asked. Yeah, how'd you guess? Rich asked. You and her are both wearing the same shirt, and there's a picture of ice cream on it right beneath your left shoulder, so, like, I'm not Sherlock Holmes or anything, but I'm not a fucking idiot either, Chris said jokingly. No, you're definitely not that. Sherlock Holmes, that is. You're not him, Rich said, smiling. Yeah, it's my first day. My neighbor just opened this place last week. He basically gave me the job. I didn't even have to ask. Typical Richie boy getting everything handed to him on a silver platter. One of these days you're actually going to have to work for your shit that you want, Chris said. Yeah, I guess I'm looking forward to that day, Rich said. How's your ice cream in there? Is it any good? I wouldn't be against getting some dessert to finish the night off, right? Chris said. The ice cream is piff. It's homemade with love and tenderness fused with the milk and cream. Larry's a master of his craft, there's no doubt about that, Rich said. You should probably get off the road, though, regardless of whether or not you're going to come in. There's a car coming up behind you, he laughed. Chris looked behind him and saw the aforementioned car pull up slowly behind Kate's. Do you want to get some ice cream? Chris asked. Sure, Kate said, shrugging. All right then, let's get some ice cream, Chris said. They parked and met Richard and the girl he was with inside the small, new ice cream shop. He faced Rich behind the counter as Kate took a seat. It's bright in here. Nice colors. It's happy. Happy is good. Have you gotten any customers yet? Chris asked. Not yet. It's still really fucking new, so we've really just been getting some passerbys who stop and see the sign. It's been pretty slow, though, Rich said. This is Gina, by the way. She works with me. You can just call her Idiot, though. He gestured over to his coworker who was leaning against the low freezer smiling at Chris. Chris laughed at the blatant insult. What makes her an idiot, may I ask? She watches Gossip Girl, and she's 16 years old. Need I say more? Rich asked. Chris laughed and shook his head. He looked at the girl. She didn't look 16. She was nice looking. Tan skin with a nice smile full of white teeth. How do you feel about this guy calling you an idiot? Chris asked. Gina shrugged and smiled. I think he's a nerd, so I don't care, she said. Rich rolled his eyes. Holy shit. You think anyone who can count to 12 is a nerd? Seriously, he said, turning his back on Chris and directing the comment right at Gina. Chris burst out laughing. He even heard Kate giggle a little behind him. You said this is your first day? Chris asked. Correct, Richard said, facing Chris again. And you're already making friends. How nice, Chris said sarcastically. Why didn't you tell everyone that yesterday you got a job, when we were all at Shaun's house? Rich shrugged. Didn't come up in conversation, he said awkwardly. Chris shrugged as well. Okay, makes sense to me. I guess I'll order some shit now. Richard. Well, it was nice seeing you, Richie boy. I'm sure I'll catch you at Shaun's sometime in the future, Chris said. He waved goodbye and exited the ice cream shop with Kate. Gina was sitting on the counter next to Richard, dangling her legs lazily. She slid off with a sly smile and poked Rich in the ribs. So that guy's your friend? Gina asked. Yeah, Chris is a friend of mine. I've known for a long time, Rich said. He's hot, Gina said with a lingering stare at the door Chris had just walked out of. Girls have definitely called him hot before, Rich said sarcastically. It's because he is hot. Was that his girlfriend? She was okay, Gina said, wrinkling her nose. Rich rolled his eyes. He's muscular, he said. Okay, and? I like muscular guys, so I guess it makes sense why I think he's hot, wouldn't it? Gina said, smiling. Too bad he's not a pedophile, Rich said under his breath. I heard that, jerk. Oh my gosh, why'd I have to get stuck with the biggest asshole to work with? I can't believe I'm going to be stuck in here with you for the rest of the summer, Gina said. Quit then. What does a 16-year-old need for money anyway? Rich asked. Clothes and food, and in case I want to go out at night with my friends and have a good time and stuff. You know, girl stuff. Stuff you wouldn't know about, Gina said. Sounds boring, Rich said. Gina rolled her eyes and slid herself back onto the counter. She kicked her feet again. Rich leaned against the wall and pulled out his phone. 6 hours he had spent in the small confines of the ice cream shop with the girl he had just met. 6 hours. He couldn't remember the last time he had spent 6 hours alone with a member of the opposite sex. He had listened to her talk about her adolescent experiences in high school. She told stories of her friends and crushes. She had insulted her intelligence and immaturity, and she had laughed it off. Richard looked up at her sitting on the counter. She was lost in her own world. He looked at the tanned skin of her arms and the curvature of her breasts against the small black polo she wore. His eyes trailed upward to her face. She grabbed the banana from out of the cabinet and was eating it. He watched her slowly place the phallic-like fruit into her mouth. Her lips encircled it before she bit down and started chewing. Richard's jaw almost dropped. He wondered if she were doing it on purpose. Doing what on purpose, he asked himself. Making me hard? She's 16, you sick fuck. She noticed him staring at her. What? She said, smiling. She took another bite of the banana. Nothing, Rich said. Fuck, I probably sound like a fucking idiot. You know what my problem is with you? I just realized it, Gina said. What's that? Rich said. My parents would like you. No girl wants to date a guy their parents would like, Gina said. Why do you think your parents would like me, idiot? Rich asked. She scowled at him. Because you're so put together. You go to school in New York and stuff. You intern to MTV. Your parents are super nice. There's like nothing wrong with you. You're harmless. You're not a bad boy. Girls like bad boys, Gina said. Idiots like bad boys, Rich corrected. So it makes sense that you would like them. Do you have a girlfriend? Gina asked suspiciously. No, I don't want one, Rich lied. Why don't you want a girlfriend? Can't do long-distance relationships or something? Gina asked. No, I just don't want one right now. I don't think anyone should be in a committed relationship until they're at least 26 or 27. It's stupid to think that the person you fall in love with at 20 is going to be your soulmate for the rest of your life, Richard said. Are you trying to say that you're a player? You definitely don't look like one, Gina said. I'm nobody, how about that? I'm just a guy that you're going to work with for the summer. In a couple of months you won't even know me, Rich said. That's kind of sad when you say it like that. We're just getting to know each other. I bet you're more fun to talk to than your hot friend. Even though I'd choose working with him over you in a heartbeat, Gina said, laughing. Holy shit, you're an obnoxious little girl. Did you know that? I feel bad for any guy who gets involved with you. I wish I could warn them to stay away, Rich said, laughing despite himself. You could try, but I'd still get away with it. I have mad seduction skills, Gina said, winking. She stuck her tongue out and licked the side of the half-eaten banana while staring at Richard with a lustful look in her eyes. She giggled. Richard's face turned red. See? Gina said with a triumphant laugh. I gotta get the fuck out of here. I'm working with this girl all fucking summer. This is the first day. Calm the fuck down. He tried. His erection pressed against his dark jeans. For a second he almost thought he saw Gina look at it, or at least in that general direction. She had a devilish grin on her face. It reminded him of the way Hannah looked the night they had sex. That scared him. I'm better than this. I'm better than this. I had sex with a 26-year-old less than a month ago. Who the fuck is this teenager? Who does she think she is? The door to the shop opened. Gina hopped off the counter. Rich couldn't help but notice the subtle bounce of her breast as she hit the ground. He hated himself. It was Larry, the owner, who walked in. So how did it go today? He asked the two. Not bad, Rich said. All things considering, at least. Everyone who came in said the ice cream was really good, so hopefully it'll spread through word of mouth. That's what we're banking on, Larry said with a wink. So are you two getting along? Now, I'm friends with Gina's parents, and I told them she'd be in good hands with you. I wasn't wrong, was I? Rich cocked his head. What the fuck am I supposed to say to that? Gina answered for him. Richard has been very nice. We're getting along very well, Mr. Walter, she said sweetly. Rich stared at her in awe. Just a moment ago she was confidently licking a banana in front of him as if it was a cock, and now she's a 16-year-old again. Okay. Well, you two are good to go. I'm just going to close up shop. I'll see you guys tomorrow, or whenever you're scheduled. I emailed you both the schedule for next week, Larry said. Rich had said his goodbyes and quickly left the shop. His car wasn't. He wanted to sprint to. His car was across the street. He wanted to sprint to it and get away as swiftly as possible. He wanted to get to a safe place and scream his head off. His body was full of nervous energy as he walked frigidly to his parking spot. Hey! Her voice cut through the night air behind Rich. Rich cursed under his breath and clenched his fist before slowly turning around. What? He asked. Do you want to give me a ride home? Gina asked with the same sweet smile that she had given Larry. Rich had no idea what was going on. He didn't hear himself giving an answer to her. He felt his lips move on their own. He understood what came out of his mouth was language, but he couldn't focus on exactly what he said. She was in his car, though, in the passenger seat. She was taking her tight black polo off, revealing an even tighter white cami. It was low cut. Her cleavage stared up at him, tan and gorgeous. Her breasts were enormous. In the 6-minute drive from the ice cream shop to Gina's house, Rich focused on nothing but the road. He was afraid that if he looked at Gina, he would crash the car or worse. She chatted the whole time, giving directions here and there to get to her house. Rich nodded his head like a caveman throughout all of it. Porn was waiting for him at home. His release was waiting for him. Just a few minutes longer, he told himself. Rich pulled into her driveway and put the car in park. It was a nice one-story house. The lights were on in the living room. Do you want to meet them? They're going to want to meet you, so you might as well get it over with now, Gina said after unbuckling her seatbelt. Why would they want to meet me? Rich asked suspiciously. They want to meet everyone I come in contact with. You don't have to now. They'll show up at the store sooner or later. I'll tell them you're nice, don't worry, Gina said. Thanks, Rich said sarcastically. Now please get the fuck out of my car. She opened the door and placed a foot out and onto the driveway. Her body was turned away from his. He looked at the outline of her back. He could see the indentation of her spine. His eyes traced her shoulders down to her slender hands. He waited for her to leave, just a moment longer. Gina hesitated and closed the door. Richard's heart skipped. He didn't know what was happening. He felt sweat underneath his armpits. He felt it rolling down the sides of his stomach as his heart hammered against his chest. He watched her bite her bottom lip and look at him. I've been thinking, she said. What? Rich asked quietly. He felt as if he could vomit. I think we should hang out, Gina said. What? Rich repeated. He sounded like an idiot. Why do you think that? He asked. I don't know. I think you'd be a good influence for me. My parents keep talking about how I don't hang out with positive influences. I could shut them up if I had you in my life. Plus, I like talking to you. We get along. So it wouldn't be torture for either one of us, you know? So what do you think? Gina asked. Okay, Rich said. He tried to sound nonchalant. He didn't want to come off like an over-anxious pervert. He didn't want to burst into hysterics and beg her to fuck him. The tits were in front of him, facing him full on. Gina smiled. That was easy. So do you want to go watch a movie this Saturday? Maybe Snow White and the Huntsman? Or maybe you should pick since you're the film major, she said. That movie's fine, he managed to get out, so I'll see you later. You bet, Gina said with a wink. She backed out of the car ass first, letting her breasts linger in Rich's view longer than he would have liked. She crossed in front of the car and gave one final wave before entering her house. Rich was finally alone. He slumped into his car in a fit of exhaustion. His penis was so hard it hurt him. He wanted to scream at himself in disgust and punch the steering wheel at the same time, but first he had to get out of her driveway. Richard was cleaning up his ejaculate 30 minutes later. He closed his laptop and put it underneath his bed. He was in his old room again. Everything was neat and orderly, just like he had left the summer before. His wastebasket wasn't yet full of tissues. He dropped the first of many into the empty container. Jerry Seinfeld smiled at him from a poster on his wall. It was dark in his room, so all he could see was Jerry's horse-faced smile and big eyes. It was the type of thing that a person sees right before they go to sleep to give them nightmares. Richard didn't have nightmares. He dreamt of a 16-year-old's tits. I've decided that I'm done with this stage of my life. I've always understood that I've always understood that given the upbringing I had throughout my childhood, my natural inclination in the later years of my life would be to find some stability. It's been easy for me to sustain a certain amount of content with the things that I have in my life. A girlfriend of 8 years and a best friend of 14, both living under the same roof as me. Fulfilling my need of a community. That need having been fulfilled quite some time ago, I think I'm finally ready to move on to greater things. Like money, for instance. I am so tired of having to worry about my financial system. Don't get me wrong, I'm not broke by any means necessary, but it infuriates me that I have to actively pay attention to how much money I spend on gas or groceries. This town is beginning to repulse me. I sit down in a restaurant and I'm served sloppy-looking food by sloppy waitresses who look like they're one final pregnancy away from being resigned to their pitiful lives in this pathetic town for the rest of their existence. And it sickens me. In short, I'm ready to get out of here, Richard. This place can't contain me anymore. I want to get the fuck out of here and never look back. If that means we have to write every day and film every week, then I am prepared to do that. All avenues of success are open to discussion. I'm writing a book and a screenplay simultaneously. I don't care anymore about having too much on my plate. The bigger the workload, the less time I have to stare at the overweight pieces of lard that pollute the sidewalks that I walk on, breathing my fucking air. I want you to be on board with me. Now, can I count on you? Richard sat on the bed in Caleb's room and stared at his friend as he spoke words that resonated within Rich. He nodded his head slowly. You can definitely count on me. I feel the same as you. I want to get the fuck out of here, Rich said. Okay, good. I want more focus and drive this summer in comparison with the previous one. I truly want to do nothing but work towards completing something good and quality. The reason that I'm saying any of this to you is because you aren't afraid of being obsessed with something to make it perfect. That's what I want to do. I want to work on something until it's perfect. There are film festivals that we can enter into across the country that I've been reading up on. I say we take on as much as we can, Caleb said. Yeah, I agree. I've always wanted to enter into film festivals, but I can never get Young Folks Comedy to hop on board. It's really why I stopped filming with them. They were too busy sucking their own dicks about how funny a skit was and how it got 14 likes on Facebook, Rich said. I understand. That won't satisfy me. I want to get noticed and get rescued out of this cesspit of a town, Caleb said. Richard nodded his head again, this time more enthusiastically. I agree. I've already been putting stokes in the fire. Amari, my boss at MTV, told me she's pretty sure she can get me an internship with Dennis Leary's production company when I go back in the fall. I plan on having some really good shit written and filmed to show him by the time that time comes around, he said. Good. I'm not going to be arrogant enough to try and take over something I have no experience in. I want to become a more capable writer, but because I feel it's something I can most definitely excel at. But as far as filming goes, I volunteer myself to be used at your whim, being that you're more of the expert. I plan on giving as much input into the creative process as possible, but I think you should have the final say in anything you produce, Caleb said. Richard looked at the ground and let the words flow out of Caleb's mouth and into his ears. You're in charge, a small voice whispered in his head. A small smile spread onto his lips. It can't be anything like last summer. I want to eat, sleep, work out, write, and film. That's what I want my life to consist of for the next 3 months, besides a vacation to Disney World, Caleb said, grinning. Richard looked up at Caleb. When's that happening again? He asked. The first week of July. I'll be down there for 10 days, Caleb said. Got it, Rich said. Do you got it? I'm saying we can't waste our time with silly YFC hangouts where we watch the others smoke weed for an hour and then play Halo for the rest of the night, Caleb said jokingly. Yeah, I felt kind of stupid the last time I invited you over to Shaun's house. I wish you had just said no. I don't even know why I keep accepting the invitations. I guess out of a sense of obligation. I don't know. I'm trying to stop, though. I'm not even having fun there anymore, Rich said. I was kidding, of course, about cutting them out of our summer schedules, but I understand what you mean. You're not at the place where you feel that it's okay to just sit around and waste time talking about inconsequential things and playing video games. You want to move forward, towards something, so let's do it together, Caleb said. Yeah. I'm sorry if it felt like I was trying to force you to be friends with him or anything. I didn't want to give off that impression, Rich said. That never came across, so don't worry about it. And it's cool regardless. I personally like hanging out with your friends. I think they're, very interesting to say the least. It's interesting to see a group dynamic function so separate from the rest of the world. You guys have created your own separate community together, equipped with your own special dialogue, mannerisms, and customs. Very interesting, the group. The individuals themselves, not so much. Some more than others, Caleb said. Richards raised his eyebrows. Who do you find the most interesting out of the group? He asked curiously. Oh, Shaun, hands down. He is by far one of the most interesting people I've ever met, Caleb said, smiling. Really? I don't understand. Why? Rich asked. Oh my god. There's so many behaviorisms to cite that I don't know where to start. For one, he's a buff black 21-year-old who calls his mom mommy, yet at the same time takes enormous pleasure out of sticking his penis down a woman's throat and fucking it as if it were a vagina. He has so many complexes going on inside his brain, it's almost sad. Do you even understand the enormity of his ego? With no accomplishments whatsoever to show for it. It's literally a miracle he hasn't killed himself or at the least developed a multiple personality disorder. Seriously, a fucking miracle. You might wonder why he is the way that he is, but all things considering, he's keeping himself quite sane, Caleb said. What do you mean? Rich asked. Here's a person who spent his entire life wondering why people don't treat him with the respect and admiration he's felt that he's always deserved. That desire isn't derived from anything. He inherited it. He was born with that ego. And he's been struggling to satisfy it in this small town, which is why he's so unhappy. In high school, he had Young Folks Comedy to fuel his fire. He got to brag about that. But after that fizzled out and all of his fans went off to college to get real jobs, he stayed behind and started working at a diner. He tries to satisfy his ego in any way he can, which is why he glorifies sex so much. In that realm, he's king. He degrades women, which heightens his own person. The reason I don't have a problem with Shaun is because, unlike most people with big egos, he's not delusional. He doesn't lie to himself. He's aware of the fact that after he comes on the girl's face, degrading them, the world is still out there beyond the four walls of his bedroom, and the rest of the population still doesn't give a fuck about him. Being the best waiter at a fucking diner won't do it for him. Getting the respect of any of his peers won't work. He wants the respect of the entire world. Is he aware of the fact that he's never going to get it? Rich asked. Caleb shrugged. You'd be surprised of the people who have been idolized over the course of the human race. If Shaun ever decides to get good at something, let's say acting for instance, then the people who revere good acting will revere Shaun Hunt, and he will be satisfied. Just like Muhammad Ali referred to himself as the greatest of all time in his sport, and Michael Jordan refers to himself as the greatest basketball player who ever lived, and Kanye West calls himself a musical genius. If Shaun Hunt goes out to California and succeeds, he will call himself a great actor, and that will give him the happiness he is so desperate on finding, Caleb said. Something bothered Rich about what Caleb was saying. He's not, though, he said, confused. He's not a great actor. He's never been a great actor. He's a good actor, but he's not a great one. Caleb stared into Richard's eyes. Do you think Daniel Day-Lewis was as talented as he is now when he was 21? Or Christian Bale? It's about applying yourself, Rich. Applying yourself to a craft and dedicating your life to the perfection of it. I can't speak for Shaun as to how successful he will be in the future. I have high hopes for him. I would like to see him succeed, however, I don't know how hard he will be willing to work for his success. I can only hold myself responsible for what I do with my time and my effort. My one concrete belief is that if I do everything right, then I'll never know if I was talented or not. I'll only know that I was a hard worker, Caleb said. Fuck, Rich thought. Caleb could not know how much that statement meant to Richard. His eyes were open wide as he considered the possibilities. Caleb stood in front of him, leaning against a large punching bag. How long have you had the punching bag? Richard asked. 2 months. I just put an order in for some brand new equipment that I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on. Some new gloves so I don't break my hand after punching this thing for more than 10 minutes, Caleb said. He dropped into a boxer stance and threw a swift jab into the air. Richard marveled at the speed and execution of the punch. He got up off the bed and walked over to Caleb. Do that again, could you? Throw another punch, a jab, he asked. Caleb threw a jab, and then another one. Rich studied the form and tried his best to mimic it with 2 jabs of his own. He looked at Caleb nervously and gave an awkward laugh before he stood upright again. I'm sorry, I don't even know how to throw a punch. It's kind of ridiculous, actually. I've never been in a fight, Rich said. Fights are underrated. You can learn a lot about what you're capable of in a fight. I miss the competitions. I look forward to going back to it in the future, when I have more money and time, Caleb said. Could you show me how to throw a punch? Rich asked. Caleb nodded his head. Why not? I've already made one of my side projects to have you go back to New York next fall with legs that will shake the ground that you walk on, with the stamina of a gazelle. We might as well add learning how to fight onto the list, just to complete the whole repertoire, he said, grinning. Thanks, Richard said. The speed never stops. From start to finish. The recoil needs to be just as quick as the initial punch. Your body is what fuels the power of the punch. You have to put your weight into it through the use of your hips and shoulders. Caleb demonstrated again. This time he punched the punching bag. It swayed from the force, and Rich could see a dent from the impact. Caleb wore a red tank top with sky blue lining. Richard looked at his friend's muscular shoulders and arms. His triceps were massive. His forearms pulsed with veins, and they hadn't even begun to work out. Can you just help me look like you? Rich blurted out. I'm tired of being small and pudgy. I want to have muscles and look good with my shirt off. Fuck. I'm sorry, I don't know. Not only am I going to help you look like me, but I'm going to help you feel like me. I want the summer to end with you thinking that you can take on anyone at anything. Now throw a punch. Shaun. Shaun sat across from Caleb and Richard. The IHOP waitress approached them. She had an ugly face and overweight body, but she bore a big smile. Shaun returned in kind. Hello. Welcome to IHOP. My name is Shannon. Can I start you guys off with something to drink? The waitress asked. Shaun looked into Shannon's eyes. I can't speak for my 2 compatriots, but I can tell you with a large degree of certainty that not only am I quite thirsty, but I have chosen water as my beverage of choice to quench said thirst. And I would be quite appreciative of you, Shannon, if you brought a lemon with said water to add a touch of flavor to it. And a straw, Shaun smiled. Shannon laughed. And how about you guys? She looked in the direction of Rich and Caleb. Water's fine, Caleb said. His eyes were on Shaun. They sparkled with his humor. Yeah, I'll take a water too, Rich said. The waitress smiled and walked away. Caleb shook his head, his eyes not leaving Shaun. Do you have fun when you do that? Do you enjoy yourself? Caleb asked. When I do what? Shaun asked. When you put on a show for the waitstaff. Why do you do it? You don't care about them. You don't want to fuck her or take her out on a date. Do you seriously not perform enough that you get small satisfaction out of interactions with waitresses at IHOP? Caleb asked. Shaun frowned. I guess I just like to hear myself talk. and the waitress doesn't have a choice but to listen. It's not just that, though. When she approached us, she was smiling. I wanted her to feel welcome. I don't know. I kind of imagine that if I treat her warmly, maybe she'll keep that smile on her face for the rest of the day. And maybe it'll be genuine. Instead of mine, I haven't had a genuine smile on my face in months. Not to get depressing, Shaun said. But you acknowledge the fact that you have no interest in her whatsoever. She could die right after you walk out of this restaurant and it wouldn't bother you in the slightest, Caleb said. Maybe in the slightest, Shaun smiled. But I guess you're right. If this was a couple years ago, or when I was in high school, you might be shocked to hear this, but I might have had sex with this waitress. I'm not ashamed to admit it. And it would be her warm smile that I would have focused on as her only attractive attribute. Ask Richard, he'll tell you, he said. Richard nodded his head. Emily Kowitz didn't have a warm smile, and yet you still fucked her, he said with a look of disgust on her face. Shaun shook his head in condescension. My sweet, sweet Richie boy. A warm smile was all Emily Kowitz had. And at the end of the day, I regret none of it. Every fuck I've ever had prepared me for the time in my life where I will fuck nothing but hot girls. The long chain of fat chicks and ugly chicks was all necessary to get me to this point. Now I'm with a 7. Sometimes an 8, depending on how I dress her up before sex and how horny I am. Anyway, my point is, I would have never gotten to this girl, or kept her this long, if I didn't fuck 12 below average females before her. Understand? Shaun asked. Not really, Rich said. How was the vacation? Caleb asked. Did you enjoy it at all? There were some aspects of it that I enjoyed. I feel kind of like an idiot, but at this point, I can't really help myself. I'm spiraling downward into my second early life crisis, or maybe my third, if I wanted to count the Mike Geller incident, Shaun said. Why do you feel like an idiot? Caleb asked. I tried to break up with her the first night we were there. I had put the plane ticket on my credit card, and for some unknown reason I was of the opinion that she would pay for the car rental. Not only did that not happen, the initial estimate of $125 was way off. It came out to $500 for the whole week. When the clerk told me the number, all I could think was that I deserved this. The only reason I went on the trip in the first place was to not waste the $400 I spent on the plane tickets. That's the only reason I went. And I know that's a stupid fucking reason. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm not thinking. Anyway, when I hand over my credit card and pay for the $500 fucking dollars that I had no intention of paying for, Sinem mutters something about like, oh, I didn't know it would be so much, and then doesn't say another word about it, Shaun said. Wow. Does she think you're rich or something? Caleb asked, laughing. I can tell you what she knows. She knows that I quit the fucking diner 2 weeks before we even left for the trip. She knows that I haven't started Applebee's yet, and that I probably won't be making nearly as much money as I did at the diner when I eventually do start, Shaun said. You quit the diner? When did that happen? Rich asked. It's all part of the crisis. I'm going to be in a play that I have to drive a fucking hour to and from to get to. 12 Angry Men. You guys should come see it when it opens. Anyway, we get into a fight about the car. She offers to pay half of it. I'm pissed that the only reason she offers is because I said something about it. So for all intents and purposes, we break up that night. No breakup sex either, which I was kind of upset about. But I knew I wasn't going to initiate it. You guys slept in the same bed that night? Caleb asked. Shaun laughed. Yeah, ridiculous, right? She was trying to sleep at the edge of the bed away from me. It fucking took me like 3 hours to go to sleep because I kept thinking how easy it would be to fuck the shit out of her in that vulnerable state she was in, and how she'd love every second of it. The only reason I didn't do it is because I didn't want her to think I forgave her for being such a dumb, selfish bitch. Anyway, the next day she calls the airlines and arranges for herself to catch a flight back home later that afternoon. Then she has the gall to fucking ask me to give her a ride. At this point, I'm fucking furious because not only did I waste $900 fucking dollars, but I didn't even get good breakup sex. I even contemplated raping her when she said that shit, but then we get back together and who knows how much more money she'd have me spend on her. So what happened? Caleb asked. I try to cut my $900 losses. I feel like the biggest idiot in the fucking world, but I try to convince myself that this is for the best. I would feel enough rage to keep me away from her so I could focus on my year in LA. Then my mother got involved. She had come down to Florida to meet us and was staying with my fake grandma, Shaun said. How is your grandma fake? Caleb asked, incredulous. She isn't related to me by blood. She was the last wife my grandfather had ever had, but they were divorced for the majority of my life. Yet somehow I still get birthday cards from her with checks in them. It's kind of sad, actually. She doesn't have a family of her own, so she calls me and Dick her grandsons. And she doesn't know a fucking thing about me. That's a different story, though. Sanem takes the rental car over to their place. She spills the beans on how I've been treating her for the past several months. Three fucking women just sit and talk about how I'm a crazy, demented asshole for 2 hours, my own mother being one of them. They all come to the conclusion that Sanem should leave me on accounts of the fact that I'm an immature, volatile, unhappy, mean, disrespectful, spoiled, and self-entitled. To which I wholeheartedly agree with. But does Sanem do that? No! She fucking comes back and sucks my dick. Are you serious? Rich asked. Of course I'm serious. My own fucking mother told the bitch to stay away from me, and instead of listening, she comes back to me, sucks my dick, and lets me do all kinds of defiling acts to her body. And my fucking dumbass, the sex addict, allowed it to happen. Great sex, though. Fuck, it was amazing. But to end the story, I come on her face and have all that pent-up rage and fury shoot out of me from the tip of my dick. So now I'm left with only a feeling of shame and guilt for what I put this poor girl through again. I feel horrible. So I suggest the only thing that I can think of, which is to go to Miami. It was the reason for the trip to Florida in the first place. I told her that I would go, but that I don't want to pay for it. Here's where it gets really sad. She tells me that all of her credit cards are maxed out, but she promises that if I put the hotel on my card, that not only would she pay me back after the vacation was over, she would pay for half of the rental car. So now here we are. I'm still with the Persian, and I'm in the hole for $1,200. Shaun said. Wow, Caleb said. I tell the best stories, don't I? Shaun asked, feeling rather cynical. So now you have to stay with her for as long as she's paying off your credit card, which you have to hope she will finish by the time you're ready to move to Cali, Caleb said. Pretty much. She promised that even if we didn't work out, she would continue to pay it off, but I take that with a grain of salt. I dug a big hole in this one, and the worst part is the longer I stay with her, the worse it can potentially get. She's going to want to continue going out this summer. She's not going to come over and suck my dick every day for the next 3 months. She's a fucking princess. Princesses want treatment. It's just going to get worse. And I have no source of income whatsoever. I'm supposed to start Applebee's a couple of days from now, but I have no clue how much money I'll be making, Shaun said. Why did you quit the diner if you knew you had to save up for California? Caleb asked. I couldn't take it there anymore. There's this manager, this fat woman, who's actually quite fuckable, but for some reason she can't stand me. She just stares at me with this look of disdain throughout my entire shift, and then she walks over to me and tells me to clean stuff when we're not busy, and I'm just thinking, fuck you, I'm not getting paid anything to do that. So I quit because of some bitch manager. Stupid, I know. All my decisions are stupid. Third early life crisis. In my defense, I did apply to Capitol Grove, a very prestigious restaurant at the Cherry Hill Mall, before going to Applebee's, Shaun said. Caleb couldn't contain his laughter. He put his face into his hands to smother the sound. When he could finally catch his breath, he looked at Shaun with a look of mixed humor and pity. Why would you think you could get a job there? It's super high class. Why would you expect to get in there without a person on the inside? He asked. One of my dad's closest friends, a bartender at Applebee's, is friends with one of the managers at Capitol Grove. He used to be a manager at Applebee's or some shit. It doesn't matter. I met him, the manager. I went through the whole process of doing the interview. I gave him my resume. I called him and spoke to him like 3 times. The last time was while I was down in Florida. He told me that they wouldn't be hiring until September. So my foolish plan is to work at Applebee's and do my best to get through the summer without going into any more debt, and then to get the job at Capitol Grove in September and make a bunch of money in 5 months and then bounce out to LA by the end of January. That's my foolish plan, at least, Shaun said. What if you don't get the job at Capitol Grove in September? Caleb asked. Then I shoot myself, Shaun said, smiling. I think that's a lot classier than doing the whole school-wide massacre thing. I've always thought that it's a little unfair, an unhappy person killing other people just because he's unhappy. That's really fucked up. Just kill yourself and let the world be miserable as they want to be. Caleb looked at Richard and smiled. See? What did I tell you? Most interesting person in young folks comedy. You think I'm interesting, Caleb? Shaun asked, starry-eyed. Very. But now that we're up to date on the many crises in the life of Shaun Hunt, do you mind if we start the conversation that is the reason that we even came to this place? Caleb asked. Where the fuck is our waitress? Shaun asked, looking around. Maybe she felt uncomfortable with the way you were eye-fucking her, Caleb said. The waitress showed up a moment later with 3 waters. Sorry about that, guys. We were having a quick staff meeting in the back. I hate when they do that in the middle of a shift. Do you know what you guys would like? She asked, grabbing her notepad and pen from her apron. The 3 ordered. She left them. Caleb put his hands together and placed them on the table. Okay, so I don't think there are any more interruptions. Basically, what me and Richard want to talk to you about is we're trying to start filming more often. Out of the other 3 members of YFC, we both agreed that you would not only be the most accessible to use in our already written scripts, but you would also be the most willing to help, out with our productions and potentially contribute to your own ideas. We intend on eventually going to Chris and giving him the same offer, but given his intense work schedule, we don't expect much from him, Caleb said. Know Joe? Shaun asked. I don't know Joe personally. I can only speak about him in regards to what you two have told me about him, and from that I can only conclude that he's not much of a team player. He gets stuck on his ideas and has no interest in helping other people create their own work. We don't want that here. Our goal is to put in a collaborative effort towards making quality films. If you were to join us, you would have to trash the YFC mentality of filming, where you guys show up the day of, not having memorized your lines and instead choosing to wing it for the next 2 hours. There will be reshoots if the finished product is not up to par with our standards. We are trying to raise the bar of quality. I have no intention of submitting anything to the internet or a film festival or any competition that I am not proud of, Caleb said. Shaun nodded his head slowly, weighing the gravity of Caleb's words. But what's the point? He asked finally. I mean no offense, but what's the difference between doing what YFC did, which was having fun and posting some funny sketches on YouTube, and what you're proposing, which is to focus on professionalism and quality sketches to still end up posting on YouTube? Don't get me wrong, I have no problem participating whenever you decide to cast me and treating with it with a degree of seriousness, but I just don't understand what you two intend on accomplishing with just yourselves. At the point that I gave up on YFC, I had just spent $1,000 on a pilot that got me nowhere, and spent 3 weeks writing a feature length that we totally could have filmed but didn't. The reason I did those things was because I was also sick of the monotony of getting nowhere with 300 plus views that we would get from each video that we posted. How are you guys going to do anything different than that? I'll answer that, Rich said. We're changing a lot of things behind the scenes. Our plan isn't to just make better sketches. I'm creating a whole website that will feature our videos on the page. I'm throwing out our old high school fan base, and I'm focusing on reaching a broader crowd. We've come up with a name for the production company, Giant Solomon Productions. Not only are we going to do comedic sketches that will be on our site and on YouTube, but we will also do dramatic short films, produce music videos for local talent, and enter into various film festivals across the country. I'm talking about the stuff that we should have been doing 3 years ago. Now it's finally going to get done. Shaun pitied Richard in that moment. He sounded like a broken record. He remembered this exact conversation years ago with Richard. He had even used the same name for the new production company back then, Giant Solomon. Why is he so obsessed with that name? It all came flooding back to him. Richard wanting to drop the Young Folks Comedy fan base a year after high school. Him wanting to start from scratch. Him threatening to tear down their YouTube homepage and every video they'd ever created. He ended up doing that partially, Shaun realized. He couldn't understand it. There was something wrong with the thought process. The rest of YC had ignored Richard when he had proposed it. They had shoved him aside and changed the topic of conversation just as easy as changing the channel. Shaun saw Caleb sitting next to Richard, and something clicked in his head. Something dangerous was happening. Shaun could sense that. He couldn't yet put his finger on it, but he knew something was wrong. Richard went on. I'm willing to spend money on software and advertising that will increase the volume of users that will travel to our site. Over time, we're going to open up a message board that will allow the fans to suggest to us skits that they would like to see made and things of that nature. Shaun wanted to yell at him. We've tried that already, you fucking idiot. But he couldn't. He could never talk to Richard that way. Shaun had always treated him as a fragile child, always doing his best not to hurt his sensitive feelings. A suspicion arose in him. You guys have been talking about this for a while, haven't you? Shaun asked. I think we've seen each other at least once every day since the start of the summer, Caleb said. Shaun nodded his head in understanding. Something is wrong. Caleb had no idea what he was getting into. He had no idea who the person was that sat beside him. Shaun knew. Shaun knew the character of Richard. He had known him for 7 years. He had seen his determination wither and blow away like an old, dried-up leaf from a shallow breeze of wind. Caleb had no experience with any of it. As smart as he was, he knew nothing about filming or marketing or Richard. Shaun did. The enterprise would fail. Shaun couldn't say it in front of Richard. He would hate him. Shaun didn't want his best friend to hate him. He looked at him. Richard's eyes were full of hope and determination. Shaun wondered how long that would last. For the length of this conversation, probably, he thought bitterly. He looked at Caleb, the unknown variable. Shaun wondered if Caleb's willpower would be all that would be necessary to make a difference. He was doubtful. They were waiting for him to speak. He had to say something. I'm honored that you guys decided to include me in on this venture, and of course I graciously accept the offer. My schedule is very open. My rehearsals for the play don't begin until later this month, and they'll be at night. So yeah, I'm a free tool to be used at your disposal. I'd love to get the opportunity to stretch my acting chops as much as possible before the big move, so count me in, Shaun said. You have to take it seriously, though. When we give you a script that you're going to be in, I expect you to have it memorized by the time we're ready to film it. The antics of young folks' comedy die with the name, Caleb said. Shaun tried to ignore the condescension in Caleb's voice. I've been doing this shit for 6 years, and you're going to tell me how to do it right? He brushed it aside. He was annoyed enough as it is. Right, he said. Feel free to get as involved as you like in the creative process as well. We have 3 scripts that are fully completed that we plan on filming in the next 2 weeks. If you have any skits that you'd like to see produced, then feel free to write them, Caleb said. And then we'll film it? Simple as that? Shaun asked, trying his best not to sound sarcastic. Simple as that, Caleb said. Joe's not here, it's just me and Caleb, and now you. If there's something you want to do, we'll do it, Richard said. Have you guys filmed anything yet? Shaun asked. Yeah. We filmed something last week that was pretty ridiculous, actually. I'm still toying with the editing. I'm not posting anything until I'm absolutely happy with it, Rich said. Then you're never going to post anything, you fucking insecure perfectionist. Can I see it when you're done? Shaun asked with a pleasant smile across his face.